Our next speaker is Joanna Maxwell, who's the Project Director Age Research at the Australian Human Rights Commission. Joanna and I are jointly members of the New South Wales Ministerial Advisory Council on Ageing. Very good to see you in this forum, Joanna. And she's been a director at the Human Rights Commission since 2017. She's also an author of Rethink Your Career in the 40s, 50s and 60s, and is writing a book on retirement at the moment. So, Joanna, would you regale us about age perspectives?
With pleasure. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. I'd like to begin by just acknowledging the custodians of the land on which I am today, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here in Sydney, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are all today, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be in the room. So thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to take a look at age beliefs and ageism. You know, we all have a heap of things that we believe to be true about older people and younger people for that matter. Some of these are useful to us, but some of them are not. And some of them are true and some of them are not. But I want to make it clear that it's not about judging ourselves or other people. Our whole society is very ageist. And ageism, as hopefully you can see on the screen, is one of the most pervasive and tolerated forms of prejudice. So what that means is that we absorb age messages from babyhood. We pick them up from family, friends, TV, news reports, advertisements, anti-aging cream, anyone? Government policy. It's very tolerated in our society. But the good news is that ageism is arguably the easiest prejudice to dismantle, far easier in many ways than, say, racism or sexism. And this is because ageism is actually about us. If we are lucky, we will all become old. So it's not about the other. You can't other ageism. Once we realize this, we start to dismantle the beliefs. So I want to show a little video now. I hope. Yes. It's a short video, but it's got some great stuff about the unconscious implications of things we say. So here we go.
All right. How you doing? Hi, good. So you were done this before? No. Exciting. So tell me, how old are you? 19, 24, 29. I'm 41. I'm going to be a mother for the first time. 42.
71.
I'm 74.
I'm ready.
Okay, so we're just going to talk. You're going to show me stuff. Do I need my glasses? I'm going to show you some slides, and I'd like you to fill in the blank and put the words "for her age" at the end of a sentence. All right. She has flawless skin for her age. Beautiful for her age. She looks better than most 20-year-olds for her age.
She looks great.
She is beautiful, fierce for her age. In burlesque, I love it.
That might be a little bit inappropriate for her age.
Jane looks amazing for her age.
She doesn't look her age. She's pretty hot.
For her age, age. I'm going to show you some other slides now. So I'm just going to ask you to read the sentences that we provided for you. Okay.
She dances well for a white girl.
That's not nice at all.
It's just ridiculous.
She's for an immigrant? No, that's so gross. She's funny for an Asian.
Oh my God, they're getting worse.
Well, this girl's half Asian, and me and her dad are pretty freaking funny, so she's gonna be funny. She's pretty for a thick girl. I hate that. You should not be defined by your size. Yeah, I hate that. She drives well for a woman.
you can't think like that. And then you bring up your kids like that. Then you have a society like that. We got another one? Is it going to be worse? There we are.
She looks good for her age.
So I didn't expect this to fall apart.
They're all the same, narrow-minded and ignorant.
I'm guilty. I say for her age all the time. It's harder to look good in your late 40s. You can be hot at 23 and you just roll out of bed.
Sometimes I think it's good and sometimes I don't.
I didn't realize I was really insulting anybody because it's only because if someone says it to me, I think it's good.
It's not a compliment.
It's really like a backhanded compliment.
I think it is a bias. People are definitely labeled by their age.
I guess for her age is more commonly accepted. This is okay to say,
Which is like, why?
You look good is a lovely compliment, but to qualify it, you're saying, well, in comparison to the mainstream of beauty, you don't look good, but you look good for how old you are.
it's degrading.
I think everyone should understand this. I think people be treated differently.
Say you look good, period. Don't add for her age.
No, I'm going to leave the for your age part off. Unless you're asked these questions, I don't think you have the mind to start this conversation.
You know what? Everyone's going to get older.
I'm really happy to take questions and comments on this. Sorry, just complete failure of technology here after I've finished, but because it's a very powerful video and I think it's really worth talking about further. Okay, hopefully that will work. I'll share again. Sorry, everybody. There we go. Okay, is that working now? Do we have a new slide up? I hope so. So for now, though, I want to keep moving because I want to talk a little bit more about age beliefs. So age beliefs can be conscious or unconscious. What do I mean by that? Well, when we meet new people, we're hardwired to rapidly and unconsciously become aware of at least 3 things about them. One is gender, one is racial or cultural background, and one is age. And we're often not aware of these things going through the back of our mind. And that's fine. There's nothing we can do about that. But sometimes we go on to make assumptions or judgments about that person because of these messages we're receiving. So we might consciously or unconsciously think, oh, that person's a bit old to do that activity or be in that job, or that person's a bit young to have that responsibility, or whatever it is. And that's where it can be tricky. And it's good to get in the habit of sort of thinking about it and checking it out with yourself, with a colleague, with the person in front. How did you get to do this? Do you feel like doing a dance class if that's the activity up for grabs? Is that something you'd want to do? All that sort of thing can really change how we see the person in front of us. Also on the screen is the statement that age beliefs can be positive or negative. Not all the beliefs we have about older or younger people are negative. Some of them are really positive. So you might have a belief that older age is a good time of life, or that older people are wise or experienced or nice. You may or may not believe these yourself, but they are beliefs that are around in our society. Same with the negative beliefs. Again, you might not believe them, but people say that older people are frail or cranky. Sometimes they say they're always sick or sadly useless. Now, the thing about all these statements is that some of them will be true for some people, but actually none of them are true for every person in their 70s or 80s or whatever. And this is the simplest definition of a stereotype. We think all people are the same in a particular category. But in fact, with older people, we know from lots of research that we become more different from each other as we age, not more similar. So the stereotypes become less and less applicable. And in fact, there's been some really serious medical research done in the last decade or more that suggests that chronological age becomes less and less helpful as a marker of medical diagnosis or treatment the older we get. So it's important to think about this stuff, I think. And, even positive age beliefs can be inaccurate and they can be harmful. We did some research in 2021, which was actually called What's Age Got to Do with It? And you can download it from the Human Rights Commission website for free. And we found that when we talked to the different age groups, the older people themselves said that the most prominent form of discrimination they faced was being helped without being asked. So we often think, and it's a great impulse, that we want to help somebody, be it a pregnant woman or a child or an older person who's got shopping in the rain or whatever. But it's a reminder, I think, that finding of ours, that it's really good to check it out with the person. Would you like some help? Sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes maybe it's not. So I want to now have a look at what is ageism, because people are starting to talk a lot more about ageism. I've been in this field for 15 years or more, and it's really noticeable that ageism as a conversation is more and more common these days. So what is it? So I've put up the World Health Organization definition there on the screen, and we like it because it's simple but very clear. So ageism is basically how we think, how we feel, and how we act towards others and ourselves, because ageism can be self-directed based on age. So thinking is stereotypes. How we feel is when that turns into prejudices or judgment, and how we act is discrimination. And age discrimination is the core work of the age team at the Human Rights Commission. And as I said, ageism can be self-directed. So your clients or the older friends or family you have may absorb these beliefs and think, I can't do that activity, I'm too old, or this is inappropriate for my age, or whatever. So it's good to know that and to check it out with them, Maybe you could give it a try, you could say, or whatever. So, next point, why do we care about age beliefs? We have beliefs about all sorts of things. I might, and in fact I do, have a belief that tofu is a bit of a waste of a food group. I do not understand tofu. I don't get the point of tofu, but nobody cares. It doesn't matter to anyone else. But what we believe about age does matter for a couple of reasons. One is that quite a lot of research now has been done that says that people who have positive beliefs about aging, so not Cinderella magic, but see the positives in aging and work towards having the positives in aging and maximizing them. Those people live healthier lives, they live happier lives, and on average, they live 7.5 years longer than people who have negative beliefs. So I think that's really important. And the same researcher, a woman called Becca Levy, who's at Yale, did a study that's known as the walking study, because she got two groups of older people and she had them come to a research facility. She put half of them in one room where they spent about 30 minutes or so looking at images about aging that were positive. So people out and about having a good time, healthy looking people, people engaged in the community. And that room had a conversation about the positive aspects of aging. The other half were put in a room where they spent the same amount of time, but looking at negative images about aging. So frailty, people sitting alone, behind a glass window looking out on the world, people with limited lives, decline, decay, all of those sort of things. And they had a conversation about the negative aspects of aging. And both groups were then told that the experiment was over and off they go. But in fact, the experiment started in that moment because they had been filmed coming into the facility, and now they filmed them when they left. And the people who had been exposed to the negative side of aging left walking noticeably more slowly, less confidently, with less stability than those same people had when they came in. The people who had the positive side of aging either walked out pretty much the same or perhaps slightly more bouncy, slightly more confidently. So that was like half an hour or more. and it had a measurable impact on them. And so I think it's really important that we understand that negative pictures of aging, whether they're from friends, from ourselves, our own beliefs, or whether it's in the media, rub off and they do have a big impact. It's good to think about this for ourselves, but also for you, it's great to think about this for your clients, customers, patients. Have a look and see whether negative aspects of aging are rubbing off and whether there's a conversation you could have about that. I want to share next my probably all-time favorite piece of research by another researcher I think is marvelous, a woman called Ellen Langer. She, very early in her career, did some research in an aged care facility in the States, and she divided residents into a number of groups, but the two that are important for what I'm going to say are a group who were given a pot plant and they were told that it was decoration, like a painting on the wall, and they could put it somewhere on the windowsill or whatever, and the staff would look after it. The other group also got a pot plant, but they had to choose it from a selection. They had to pick their own plant, and they had to be responsible for its care. So it was up to them to take care of it and to keep it alive. Super simple experiment. They left 18 months later, they came back. And they found that the people who'd had to care for their own pot plant were significantly more cheerful, more active, and more alert, and they were twice as likely to still be alive. I think this is an extraordinary experiment, and certainly we've had people, when we've spoken about this in a research project we did, come back and say, we're getting the local nurseries to deliver plants to our facility and all that sort of stuff. But it doesn't have to be a plant. I think what it shows is how simple a sense of purpose can be, or a sense of meaning. It doesn't have to be a big, complex thing. So I'm going to show you now the key findings from our 2021 research that I referred to before. We surveyed Australians, 2,400 of them across the lifespan, about their own generation and the other generations. And these are our key top-line findings. They're stereotypes, of course. This is what Australians told us. Doesn't necessarily mean they're true. But I've circled the finding about older people because it was of great concern to us, and it led to some further research and workshops, which I'll talk about. What it basically said was that, we all love Nana and Pop, but we really love them if they sit quietly on the sidelines as they fade away from life. I think that probably it's fine if they bake some biscuits for the grandchildren or take care of them from time to time. But in terms of engagement in mainstream community, doing meaningful roles to them, there was really nothing that came across. And if I tell you that we got our survey participants to tell us how old they thought each of these generations were, and they told us that older people was anyone over 62, I think this is highly problematic and has great implications for the treatment of older people in the workplace, in shops, in the health system, everywhere. So we got some funding from the Federal Department of Health, and we did some further research because we wanted to unpack this a bit. So we examined the effects of a one-off workshop, 2.5-hour workshop, on age beliefs and ageist attitudes. And the participants in the workshop were people who work with older Australians in aged care and community service settings. So we surveyed these participants using the scales on the screen that are noted global scales of ageism and age expectations. We asked them some questions. We then gave them a 2.5-hour workshop, either face-to-face or online. And then we surveyed them again straight away and see whether any of their attitudes had changed. We followed up and surveyed them a third time 3 months later. And in between, some of them attended focus groups. So the workshop was the core, the central piece of this. So 2.5 hours. It was on age beliefs and attitudes that might lead to behaviors. So we went upstream. because we knew that if you could change the attitudes that lead to problematic behaviors, you vastly reduce the likelihood that the behaviors would happen. So the focus was very much on being neutral and non-judgmental. And as I've said, there's no room for judgment around this. We are all ageist. I still say ageist things all the time. The only difference is that I pick myself up and laugh at myself sometimes when I talk about a young tech guy or, one of those stereotypes. So it was very non-judgmental. We gave participants plenty of time to tell us their own experiences and ideas. I spoke a bit about what we know about age and aging. We busted some myths about older people. And we spent quite a lot of time talking in groups and together about what people might want to do when they went back to their workplace, how they could change things. The other thing up on the screen is that we targeted benevolent ageism, which is well-intentioned ageism, that thing like offering to help people. Um, we did that for a couple of reasons, but one is that we know that hostile ageism, aggressive, deliberate ageism or prejudice against older people is a whole degree more complex than well-intentioned ageism, and the roots of it are quite individual. So it's much harder to target in a group 2.5-hour workshop. So that's why we did what we did. What did we find? Well, we were delighted. We found that, as it says there, a brief one-off educational intervention, the workshop, can be a powerful tool, creating lasting positive changes both in attitudes and in behaviours towards older people. Now, in case you think that I just asked a few people and they said, yeah, it was lovely. And I said, so that means it was fantastic. We had external providers, research providers, who did all the surveying, all the focus groups, and came up with those findings for us. Now, this is a slide that shows the top changes after 3 months from the workshop. And I think it's really interesting that one workshop, 3 months later, 90% of people told us that they had rethought the way they communicate with older people. Now, we did, as part of the workshop, a little case study on how we talk about older people and how we talk to them and with them. So that perhaps wasn't surprising. It was also a really simple thing that people could do in their workplace to change some of their language and the tone, not talking to older people in that sing-songy tone, like, come on, love, you'll be right. All of that sort of stuff, which is well-intentioned and kindly meant, but can be quite problematic for people. 87% of them said they had conversations with people they know about ageism. So we were expecting and encouraged people to have conversations with colleagues at work. But we found that they also had a lot of conversations with family, with friends, and with their older clients or patients as well. And that was really helpful, because we know that one of the key ways to break down ageism is a ripple effect. It's people coming to a session or having a conversation, even like this one today, and then going out and sharing some of the information with other people, and particularly with ageism. It can be that simple. It's like a light bulb goes off in your head and you go, yeah, actually, I could see this in a different way. 86% had thought about and in fact told us that they had done lots of things to change attitudes in their own workplace. And the report, which is on our website, freely downloadable, has some great stories and ideas. They were very personal to people's workplaces, which is what we wanted. And interestingly to us, 82% had rethought their own attitudes towards their own aging. This was not a primary intention of the program, but we were really pleased to see that it had this spin-off personal effect on them, and particularly with our audience of participants, and potentially a little bit the same for you today in this audience. If you work with a population of mainly frail, much older people who need some form of support or assistance, it can be really easy to assume, that's inevitable, and all older people will be like that, and I will be like that when I age. And in fact, it's vastly not true. And that's some of the myth busting that I do in the actual workshop. So it was lovely to see that it had that spin-off effect on the participants themselves. The focus groups were a really big source of insights for us and reinforced the findings of sustained attitude and behavioral change. I'm not going to go into them in any detail, but we clustered them into 6 headings or themes. One was self-reflection, because lots of people hadn't really thought about ageism before the workshop. Maybe in this audience today, some of you have never thought about ageism in that way. Help them to avoid assumptions, to challenge some assumptions they didn't realize they were making and rethink. Language, I've spoken about the fact that we did a language case study. Changed approaches at work, not assuming that people need help by default, all of that sort of thing. Lots and lots of very specific and different approaches, like not asking someone their chronological age as the first question when you meet them, but maybe just tuck it in towards the end and ask them what they need or want first. Sharing the workshop information, that's this ripple effect I've talked about, and I'm going to tell you a little story about that in a minute. That also involves the final one, which is intervening after witnessing ageism. We had a number of people on the workshop who already did know quite a lot about ageism, but they told us that what happened in the workshop was that they had a good refresher, but it also gave them confidence to speak about ageism more widely in a way that perhaps they hadn't before. So we're drawing nearish the end of my formal presentation, and hopefully you'll have some questions, because I always love discussing these things. But I want to tell you just a couple of little stories from participants. The first one is called Robotics Classes, because it's about a woman called Kim, who is a librarian who is in charge of programs for older people at her library. And she told us this story in a focus group. Before she came across our research and did the workshop, she had been approached in the library by someone who wanted to run robotics classes for older people. So Kim was very dismissive and said, older people won't want that. They wouldn't be capable of it. That'll be risky and stupid, and we're not happening. Go away. So this person shuffled off and went away. She did the workshop, and we challenge everyone at the end of the workshop to come up with 2 or 3 easy, small things, because I think this has to be done in easy, small ways, particularly for people like Kim, but also like, I assume, all of you who are overburdened, underpaid, and really don't need to completely have to change your entire workplace, even if you could get system permission from the people who run it to do that. So little things are great. So after the workshop, Kim challenged herself to contact this person again and see whether they would still prepared to run the workshops. They came back and said, yes, we'd love to. That would be great. So the first class was oversubscribed, had 15 people and a waiting list. Huge enthusiasm. The people who attended the workshop loved it and wanted more. One woman wrote in the feedback that it was the best fun she'd had in a library ever. And now that library is running that workshop quarterly, and because of word of mouth, it's still filling up instantly with a waiting list. So a small thing, but has a great impact on the people who do the workshop, but also the people working in the library and other older people who see that this is kind of possible and interesting for older people. The other story I want to tell you is a council volunteer called Tristan, who is one of the people who did the workshop and already knew quite a lot about ageism. But he said to us, I'd never really spoken out much about it, but the workshop gave me that confidence. And so soon after the workshop, he was at his local bowls club, in fact, so not in the workplace, but he walked past a group of his mates, and one of them was saying something ageist to another one, about, oh, you silly old whatever. And Tristan had never really intervened before, but this time he stopped and he said, you know what, mate, That's called ageism, and we don't do that anymore. And he sat down, they had a conversation as friends about it. And that itself is a fantastic result because that's how this ripple effect kind of spreads through the community. But the coda to this story, I think, is even more interesting. It was about a month or so after that, Tristan was at the bowling club again, and he walked past this group of people. And the person who had made the ageist remark a month ago was now telling somebody else, no, we don't do that here. That's called ageism. And let me talk to you about it. We can have a conversation. And we loved that story because to us it demonstrated perfectly how all of this stuff works. So I want to wind up the formal presentation, but as I said, I hope we have time for a few comments and questions. But I always end presentations with this because I think it's really important to stress that older age is a valuable and quite natural life stage. We are living about 30 years longer than we were 100 years ago, and this increased longevity is a great and good thing for society and for us as individuals. And the good news is that while we're still adding about a month every year to our overall lifespan, we are adding even more to our healthy lifespan, our health span. So not only are we living longer, but that, problematic time at the end of life is shrinking. Will never disappear, of course, but it's shrinking. So this is all natural. This is all terrific, but ageism is not natural. Ageism is a social construct. We made it up and we can and should dismantle it. But we can only do that if we become aware of it. And so this talk, the workshops that I run, a whole lot of other things are that first step in becoming aware. We often say in my field that ageism is 30 or 40 years behind where racism and sexism are in terms of campaigns and public awareness and dismantling that. And so we need to start where we are and raise awareness, have conversations, spread the word, and all of that sort of thing. So there's time for some questions, but I just want to say that we would love to talk to you if you're interested in an online or face-to-face workshop, or you'd like me to do an online or face-to-face talk about like this to a networking group. We love spreading the word. It's the kind of thing that means a lot to us. It's our core mission at the Human Rights Commission. So if you want to take a photo of that slide, or I'm sure the organisers can put you in touch with me and my team if you would like to take this further or speak more. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, I hope. Did that work?
It certainly did.
I'm always relieved when the technology works.
Thanks very much, Joanna, and thanks for battling through that slight glitch at the end of the video when it wouldn't move on.
Yeah, sadly, that's not the first time that's happened with that video. It has a mind of its own.
Yes. We've got a few comments and some questions in the chat. Kate posted the story about her mother, 95, and challenging almost herself as well as the people around her that she can do much more than people expect of her at that advanced age. The comment, there were 12 different physios who worked with her over the past year and 3 hospital admissions, but the one that had the most effect on her and got the progress happening was the one that the physio that expected the most from her. Your observations on that?
I think it's really interesting, and I'm always careful to say I do not subscribe to that Californian hippie herbal view that we are all unlimited and amazing and can defy death and decline. But almost all of us can do heaps more than we think we can. And particularly as we get older, we do get bunched into these groups and judged often by the people with the least capacity in that particular group. And I think it's important that we check it out and encourage people to try more. And I know that it sometimes bumps up against some of this stuff about risk management, and we can't, we can't get people to do this. But I'm a great believer in what I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of the dignity of risk, and that as much as possible, even if someone is 95, we should allow them to make their own decisions. And if you've got time, I've got a wonderful story that someone told me in another workshop, which was after they'd done some work like this, they went back and said, "Well, what do you really want?" And a woman who I think, I may have it wrong, but I think was about 90 or a little older, she said, the one thing I want for my birthday is I want to go and visit a sex shop because I have never been to a sex shop and I think it would be really fun. And these people for once said, "Look, great idea, we'll get it together." So in the end, I believe there were like 14 of them on a minibus, and they set it up with a particular shop in the quiet time so that it wasn't. And one of them piked and stayed on the bus when they got there, but the others went in and were asking questions, and I believe bought one or two things. And it's the kind of thing that is, you would never occur to you to have it as a scheduled activity, and I feel you might bump up in some institutions against problems if you did. But, who would know until you asked that that's a possible thing that somebody in their 90s might want to do? So, small things you can ask.
Absolutely. Kate raises the issue about caring and whether it benefits the people who are caring for someone who's frail and old, or whether, and Anne Muldowney has raised the issue that the evidence is that being a carer has a negative impact on yourself and the wider family. So it's quite a difficult thing to get right. What's your perspective on where care fits into this?
I think I take my hat off to carers, both formal and informal, and of people of all ages who need support and get it from somebody in their family or from paid carers. I think it's an extraordinarily underrated and difficult task. And I'm sure in your field, there is lots of literature and discussion about ways to take care of yourself and to see things more broadly. All I would say in terms of our work is that finding that these people, because the people we surveyed in these workshops, we're now running them for anyone who wants them, but in the beginning, we're very specifically all carers of older people. And we had lots of marvelous conversations with them in workshops, and we got lots of comments from them in surveys and focus groups afterwards, that it was really good to see a bigger picture. So in the workshop, we bust a lot of myths about older people, and it gave, as I showed on that slide, 82% of them rethought their own attitudes and got a wider perspective and a broader way of looking at it. And I think the more that you can find ways, and I know it's hard because it's a really busy, overstressed system, but find ways to interact with the people you're caring for as individuals with worth and a story, and ask them what they want, smaller things perhaps than excursions in minibuses, but whatever. The more that you're seeing the value of the work that you're doing is going way beyond immediate physical care, if that makes sense. You're engaging with humans, and I think in any field that makes, in my field, I love it when I get to get out and actually talk to people, not government documents, because I think it gives you the return for the work that you put in.
Yeah, one of the voluntary jobs I'm doing nowadays is as a board director with Meaningful Aging Australia, which is the body that oversees spiritual and pastoral care and representation of those needs. And absolutely, you're right. There's a whole spectrum of our lives that is not solely about physical issues or even emotional or mental health issues. It's around that deeper search for meaning. We encourage conversations around that with people. There's been a couple of comments in the chat about the habit of newspapers and magazines and news articles to ascribe the age of the person when they do the reporting. Joe Bloggs, age 60, robbed the shop, that sort of stuff.
Yes.
Um, it often appears to me and to some of the people in the chat that it's almost an irrelevancy
Yes.
and doesn't tell you very much about the person. But as you said earlier during the presentation, it's often one of the first things you look for. You kind of become conscious about gender, you become conscious about ethnicity, and you're conscious about age. So just your reflections on that.
Yeah, I mean, there are times obviously where knowing someone's age is really important, and that's sometimes in a media story. And sometimes there's stories that are very well intentioned and quite interesting to read, like man 95 gets PhD, or Nana 80 celebrates her birthday by jumping out of an aeroplane, hopefully with a parachute. But then you can understand. But even then, when it's celebrating age, it's making age an exceptional thing, and everyone has an age. And the one that drives me equally insane is when women do things, they're always described as a mother or a grandmother.
Yes.
And it may have nothing, often has nothing to do with the story. It's a similar thing, but I think media loves short, sharp vignettes of people. They love creating conflict, which is why, I run other workshops where we talk a lot about intergenerational relationships, and the media love batting one generation against the other, and that's problematic. Their reporting generally about older people is pretty abysmal. And I used to be a journalist, so I feel like I can get away with that safely. But it's a real pity that people are bracketed by chronological age, because as I said, we get more and more different as we age, and it's often a sort of shorthand that's, I think lazy reporting. Far better if they found out something that was actually relevant to the story about the person,
Yeah.
and focused on that. But, changing the media is probably beyond any of us in the next week or
Yes.
two.
Exactly. Danny, this will be the final one we'll do before we go to a break. Danny's raised in the chat, a challenge could be changing the person's own perception of themselves and their age and what they are or are capable of, that is linked with that, and cognitive decline and so forth. One issue he sees fairly regularly is challenging around the rapid changes in technology and helping older people to actually manage those sorts of changes. Your thoughts on that?
Interesting, isn't it? I'm after this flying to Tweed Heads so I can run a workshop that's in northern New South Wales for the Seniors Festival tomorrow, which is talking to older people themselves about internalized ageism and the ageism they get. And I think that technology is one area where it can be easy for older people to kind of give up, because they buy into this stereotype that there's a digital divide and old people can't do tech. And in fact, we discovered one of the relatively few good things that came out of COVID was, as soon as older people, and some of them were what I would call the old people in their late 80s and 90s, realized that the only way they could stay in touch with their grandchildren and their children and whatever was through FaceTime on an iPad. You know what?
Yeah.
They learn how to use those iPads pretty quickly. So I would love to see more focus on supporting older people, building capacity, making technology fun. There's a great video, I don't know if you can still get it, called Cyber Seniors, where some high school kids went into an aged care facility and taught them all how to use Facebook and make YouTube videos. And it's a really marvelous, it's a little bit too heartwarming for me.
Yeah.
But it's a really marvelous story of these people saw the point of it. So they were making YouTube videos about 6 foods you can cook in a toaster. Very enlightening. Teaching dance moves on YouTube. And they had a competition in the end. The person with the most YouTube likes after a month won. So it incentivized them in a way, gave them something. We know that older people don't adopt tech for the sake of it like young people do, just to play. But if
Yeah.
they can see the point of it, there's no lack of capacity. you know? Um, and I think, a great study. Sorry, I know you're running out of time. I'll speak very quickly because there's a marvelous study that was done where they put younger people in a room and locked them in with what we would call a cassette player. So they didn't know what it was. And they gave them a tape, a pen, and this machine and said, can you work out how to make this work, what it is, and they really went through exactly the same stages of confusion, trying things, giving up, getting angry, as older people do when they're shown, a box like this, and what do you do with it? So it is about unfamiliar tech, not about age. And I think that's a really important message to finish on.
Yeah, that's a good point, Joanna. Well, look, thank you very much for your comprehensive presentation and some great tips on how we think about aging stereotypes, how we feel about it, prejudices, and then worse, how we act about it when the stepping over into actual discrimination. Thank you very much, and we look forward to ongoing engagement, you and I, on the
MECA, absolutely.
Ministerial Committee. So, thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.